So welcome to the second webinar of 2023. Every single webinar that we do here is quite unique and bespoke information on a particular topic, but none so much as this one. But it shouldn't be quite so specialized because almost every woman goes through this at some point in her life. And more athletic women are wondering what to do when they go through pregnancy. Do they follow the standard government guidelines and get a bit lost or shortchanged? Or do they seek a specialist such as Henrietta, who can actually give them some really good guidance? And I opt for the second one. So Henrietta, I'll just quickly introduce her. I've known her for a few years as a fellow graduate from CNELM as a nutritional therapist. Henrietta was an international pole vaulter, so literally one of these amazing people who defied gravity. And she's made her home in the health-based nutrition space with athletic people, and now she's specializing more in the fairer sex, which is wonderful. So this is a brand new topic, brand new slides, and I thank Henrietta very much for sharing this with us. So with that, just before I pass over Henrietta, we'll follow the standard pattern. Henrietta will present. Any questions that come up as she presents, please just put them in the chat box and we'll have a Q&A at the end. I'm going to stimulate a little bit of discussion as well in the chat box because I think that's quite healthy for a good webinar. And I'm going to offer, like I've started to do, a free place on our next short course to the most interactive individual in the chat box. Okay. Over to you, Henrietta. And you're still muted.
Sorry, I muted myself to blow my nose and then forgot. So I will just apologize. I've got a stinking cold, so I might sound a bit funny. So sorry if my voice goes a little bit during this, but that was a lovely introduction. Thank you, Ian. So yeah, I'm here to talk about nutrition for the athletic mum. Ian already introduced me, so I won't go into too much. I was an athlete. I've been working with a broad range of clients for a while, but yeah, I've stayed in the sports nutrition and athletic space as well. But then when I had my two sons, I became acutely aware of the horrible sort of government guidelines and advice out there around nutrition and exercise in pregnancy and how it just wasn't really applicable to someone who was a former international athlete. But then, you know, anyone who's already training regularly into, whatever standard, I think the advice on the whole is pretty inadequate. So I kind of went down into that sort of area as well, into fertility and pregnancy. But then it's because of my sports background, it's kind of also merged with actually being athletic at the same time. So that's how I got into this. So what we're going to cover today is the sort of key metabolic changes that you go through in pregnancy and the impact that might have on exercise and training and how to continue. Key nutrients needed in pregnancy. So I'm not going to it's not an exhaustive list. It literally is the big hitters, where they fit into those metabolic changes, the sources and the amounts that are recommended and whether they're relevant really for an athletic population. I'm going to focus a little bit on protein and vitamin A and liver, and that will all become clear, hopefully. A little bit of evidence for, is there actually concern? Is this an area of concern in athletes, this nutrient status? So we'll have a quick look at that, and then we'll look at breastfeeding as well and the changes in breastfeeding and how that's going to impact anyone who's looking to recover and then return to training afterwards. So key metabolic changes, weight gain, which seems fairly obvious. But it's a big one, and the thing is, it's not just that you have a baby in you, so you gain weight, which seems like an obvious thing to say, but there's actual metabolic changes that go hand in hand in that increase a mum putting on weight. They increase fat stores, and that's a natural thing, and it needs to be allowed to happen, because you're storing up energy and reserves for childbirth, for recovery, and then for breastfeeding at the end. So you become more insulin resistant throughout as pregnancy goes on. So you're sparing glucose for the baby to use, basically. So mum needs to be quite efficient at being able to use ketones and fat in that situation, so that her energy levels can stay high, and your energy can be good, especially if you want to keep training. And then there's changes in the microbiome, such that, by the time a woman is 9 months pregnant, she kind of has a microbiome that's very similar diversity, and is very similar to that of an obese person. So your body is trying to put on weight, trying to gain fat, and it's not something you want to fight. You want to go with it and allow it, but that's not to say you eat whatever you want. But you've got to recognize that this is going to impact if you are going to keep exercising, training, etc. And how you use actually nutrients for that exercise too. So immune system, that goes through some quite significant changes. You essentially, and it is very complex, and it was hard not to really get stuck, as I said to Ian before, in the weeds on this one, because there's at cellular level, there's changes in all sorts of different signaling proteins, but on the whole, it's an anti-inflammatory state, pregnancy. And that's a lot of that's to do with the fact that you don't want your body to reject and attack what is a foreign body that you're growing inside you. So you have high levels of progesterone, which has anti-inflammatory mechanisms. It stimulates interleukin-10, and it inhibits Th1 responses, and the high serum estrogen sort of promotes Th2 responses. So you move more towards a Th2 dominated response, which can be very good for some women who suffer with autoimmune diseases, because they can go to complete remission during pregnancy, and that's one of the main reasons why. And also, if you are having generally just a normal and healthy and happy pregnancy, you can feel, because of that high circulating progesterone and estrogen, you can feel quite good, in pregnancy. You are anti-inflammatory, so you can feel quite good, but it's a bit of a trade-off, because if you're basically damping down your inflammatory responses, it means that you're going to accept the baby and allow it to grow, and more Th1 driven conditions are going to be subdued, but you're not going to be able to mount as robust an inflammatory response as you were before. So you are more susceptible to things like viruses, maybe, and bacterial infections, because you haven't got that really robust inflammatory response at the beginning of bodily invasion that will get rid of it nice and quickly. So there's that to consider, but also your immune system, and your particularly inflammation, is a key part of recovering from training and being able to make adaptations. So you've got to remember that adaptation is going to probably be blunted as well, and you can't be expecting to, it kind of seems obvious, but you can't be expecting to make the same gains if you're pregnant and training than you were before, and you've got to keep that in mind. And whereas before, if you had a bit of a head cold, a bit of a stuffy nose, whatever, you might go and do a weight session or do something and train. Once you're pregnant, maybe that's not the best decision, because you are not going to recover so well, and you're not going to be able to fight that virus off as easily because of this change in immune status. So it's worth considering that. There's also cardiac and blood changes. There's a massive increase in blood volume. There's actually a decrease in hemoglobin concentration and red blood cell count at the same time. And then there's a decrease sort of in systemic vascular resistance to accommodate all these different changes. So if you're more of an aerobic athlete, these are definitely going to impact the type of training you can keep doing, and the intensity and the level that you can keep doing that at. And again, it's just that acceptance that training through pregnancy is probably more about blunting the detraining effect rather than just continuing to try and make gains. So it's about trying to maintain, or even if it's not maintaining, decrease the speed at which you're detraining, then you've got to consider all these changes you're going through. There's respiratory changes because oxygen demand increases dramatically, but at the same time, definitely towards the end, it gets harder and harder to breathe as the pressure from baby pushes everything up. And then there's huge hormonal changes, which again, it seems a bit obvious to say, but considering that as an exercising or training woman, hormones are going to play a huge role in that, in your adaptation to exercise, in your mood when you exercise, and your response to exercise, and it's definitely going to impact that. So during pregnancy, there's a massive increase in estrogen, progesterone, and prolactin. So during pregnancy, those are still nice and high. But they're reducing tissue changes. It mainly starts to come from the placenta, and then there's a whole new hormone that you produce called the human chorionic gonadotropin hormone. So yeah, you're producing lots of hormones, and so you've got to look at, am I eating the right things to support this hormone production? So those are the key changes. There's obviously more, but again, I didn't want to get too bogged down. So when we're looking at key nutrients that are focused on by government guidelines and by the NHS and multi-nutrients, these are probably the key ones. Folate, iron, zinc, choline, DHA, protein in general. I've just put separately, but A, D, E, and K, all the fat-soluble nutrients, cholesterol, and calcium. So looking at where they fit into those areas that I just talked about. So when we're talking about the weight gain, the macros and your balance of macros and how you use them through pregnancy is something that you need to sort of consider. As like I said, pregnancy is kind of an increasing state of insulin resistance. So it's going to impact the weight you gain and how you're using energy. Hormonally, you need zinc, cholesterol, iodine, selenium, magnesium to be able to make hormones, use hormones. So those key pregnancy nutrients are also super key in maintaining sort of exercise and training status for you. Iron and magnesium play a key role in your sort of your CV and your blood health. Your skeleton, I didn't put skeletal as one of the key areas, but skeleton definitely changes as actual physical changes in your pelvis, but in your bone density as well can be affected by pregnancy due to the baby needing lots of calcium. Respiratory, again, sort of iron intake, and then immune system, you've got zinc, A, D, E, cholesterol, iron, thiamine, nice, all the B vitamins, so kind of protein, lots of things play into immune system. And then, like I said, all these systems get impacted by the physical and physiology of pregnancy, and they're all systems that play key roles in exercise and training. So this is where sort of the two areas need to be, the nutrients in these two areas need to be considered quite carefully. And this slide, I just put it in because I typed key pregnancy nutrients into Google, and these are running on a theme. These are the sorts of pictures that all came up, or lots of lovely colourful fruit and veg, lots of pregnant women, all eating salads. And it really annoyed me, and I'll show you why. So this is not really what the sort of images I wanted to have here, but this is a demonstration of the misguided, in some areas, advice around sort of pregnancy nutrition. There's a lot of information on here. I'm not going to go through it all, but this is the key nutrients that I just mentioned. So if we pick some of them, we'll start. Folate is a bit of an obvious one because everyone knows about it, and it plays a really integral role in neurological development, and we know that deficiency in folate can lead to neural tube defects. So it's recommended you supplement with 400 milligrams a day, with sort of 200 milligrams intake to be a sort of total of 600. Sorry, I forgot to start my clock, so I'm just going to do it now so I don't run too far over. So folic acid is a big one, and people will know to supplement with it. A couple of things to consider is that folic acid, the synthetic form of folic acid that's in most pregnancy and supplements, can actually block the uptake of folate from whole food sources. So high serum levels of folic acid won't necessarily reflect your cellular folate that can actually be used. And the advice in the mainstream is eat lots of green leafy vegetables, but beef liver is actually the best source of folate. And folate, like all the B vitamins, play a key role in energy metabolism. So it's key for baby and it's key for mum if you want to keep exercising. So this 600 milligrams a day for me is sort of, it's the base level. Now, with all of these, a few of these are, few of these on here are a little bit higher than government guidelines, and I'll talk about why. But there is no, the nutrient recommendations in pregnancy, there's no differentiation between a sedentary woman or an active woman or an athlete. I mean, there's barely any research that looks into nutrient requirements for athletes alone. It just hasn't, it's not really out there that they, you know, what if they require over and above the RDAs. So there's definitely not anything out there at the moment for pregnancy and being an athlete. So what I've got in here is a mixture of the RDAs, and for me, this is the absolute bare minimum that you need to be. So zinc, it's 11 milligrams a day, but 83% of pregnant women are deficient already in zinc. So because we don't store it, so it's all about what you intake from food, and that's from oysters, red meat and poultry. I've listed the highest food intakes here, not all the foods that have it, but the best ones. Iron is a 30 to 60 milligram a day sort of range. Now, iron is an interesting one because the needs of iron for baby and mum in pregnancy can actually exceed what you can absorb, which is one of the main reasons why so many women end up anemic during pregnancy. Also because people don't eat enough of it potentially on a day-to-day basis. And one of the key things about a lot of these nutrients, so folate, zinc and iron, they all have critical windows in the early stages of pregnancy where they do their thing, where they're most important. So they're all involved, iron, zinc and folate are all involved in development of the neural tubes and the key sort of brain function of baby. And it all happens really early on in pregnancy. So there's a real need to be focused on that prenatal nutrition and actually spending 3 to 6 months really on a really nutrient dense diet and making sure that all these things are replete and optimal before you get pregnant. Because as I'll show later, there is evidence that women athletes are in at danger of being deficient in many of these key nutrients. So if you are deficient and you get pregnant and you don't realize until you're sort of 4 or 5 weeks pregnant, maybe even 6, and then you start supplementing for a couple of the actions of a couple of these nutrients, you've missed the real critical window of optimizing your baby's health, but then also optimizing your health in recovery, because it's likely it's going to be very hard to become sufficient once you've already are deficient and then you're pregnant. So therefore, you and baby are going to be compromised, and then recovery afterwards is going to be compromised. So I sort of like to think about going into pregnancy like you would go into, if you're an athlete, if you go into surgery, there's going to be a detraining effect after surgery. There's going to be trauma. So you want to minimize how quickly and how impactful that is by going in as healthy as you possibly can. And this is absolutely the case with becoming pregnant. You want to be replete in all these vitamins and nutrients before getting pregnant. Some other ones. So choline really is an interesting one. So it's recommended that you have 425 milligrams normally on a day-to-day basis, and it's only increased by 25 milligrams in pregnancy. But there are studies that show benefits to baby of 3 to 4 times higher intakes than that, because it's so ubiquitous. It's involved in cell signaling. It's one of the key, it's key for phosphatidylcholine, which is again is to do with neurological development and liver health. But then in terms of being an athlete and for mum, we know that choline is involved in enhancing endurance performances because of its cell signaling capacity. It enhances muscle performance, recovery and stamina. And if you're using it that way, then you're taking 1 to 2 grams a day already before you exercise. So these sort of intakes aren't matching up with a lot of the things that athletes might already be doing. So again, for me, these are something to be, this is the bare minimum. And I think it's probably more prudent to really be looking at sort of safe upper tolerable limits. So we know where perhaps we shouldn't be going over, but we could just under that might actually be more about in the range where you could be as an athletic mum. Let's pick a couple of more. So calcium, really important one, because some studies report women being sort of 40% of women being below 1,000 milligrams a day, and that's what's needed again as the bare minimum. There is and if you don't have it in your diet, it gets taken out of your bones for baby, so you'll miss out, and that will have a big impact on training and maybe even injury during pregnancy and afterwards if we're trying to come back. Now, there are some physiological changes which protect mum's skeleton a bit, as you do increase intestinal absorption when you're pregnant, but I don't think it's something you want to take risks with. So you've got to be including food sources on a daily basis of at least 1,000 milligrams a day. DHA, another really important one. DHA is incorporated into baby 10 times faster than they can actually synthesize it, because it plays such a huge role in so many functions, but really for brain function, it's huge. So yeah, look, 3 milligrams a day is incorporated into baby's brain in the 3rd trimester. So, and maternal losses of DHA, so that if baby's taking everything and you're becoming depleted, then it does have quite strong links with postnatal depression afterwards, so impacting how you recover. So yeah, it's worth really paying attention to that. And then let me go back again. Go back. There we go. The animal fats, A, D, and K, and cholesterol. These are really, really important for baby's health. Cholesterol's a really important one for cell membrane, cell signaling, cell proliferation, which is, as a fetus, that's what they're doing. It's a bundle of cells that it has to proliferate. So cholesterol is a really important one. It's much maligned. Obviously, we all think that we have to. I feel like the NHS's goal seems to be just like less cholesterol is better, and I don't know, the markers for high cholesterol seem to be getting lower and lower year on year, which is worrying because it's an essential nutrient. And yeah, the baby will accumulate almost up to 2 grams of cholesterol for every kilogram of tissue they put on. So it needs to be in your diet. And the same thing with animal fats, because they supply the fat soluble nutrients A, D, E, and K, which can't be got from plant fats at all. So vitamin E can be got from avocado and olives, but they're fruit fats. But your other plant fats, you're not going to get your A, D, or K from them, and they are really important for baby's skeletal health, baby's immune system, and then yours as well. Especially if you're going to continue training. Most women have overt vitamin D deficiency by the 3rd trimester because of the rapid bone growth of baby in that time, and you're their sole source of vitamin D through pregnancy and then through breastfeeding too. The recommendation is only for 400 IU a day, which is just not sufficient in my mind at all for what's being required of you as a mother, and then also of you as an athlete. So it would be get outside. That's the best form of getting vitamin D anyway, when you can, with your skin out. Get optimal in the summer, and then supplement through the winter to try and maintain a higher level as possible, I think. And then throughout pregnancy and throughout whatever time of year, throughout breastfeeding, you need to be supplementing with vitamin D. So that's just sort of a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but you can see how these sort of recommended levels are really got to be on the real low end. It's got to be the bare minimum of what you're doing, and perhaps it's worth looking at more like I said, the safe upper limits of these nutrients per day, and working at that end rather than at this end. Now, again, as you can see, I've written the sort of the key sources for these nutrients on here. And apart from magnesium, which admittedly, yeah, is probably, apart from yogurt, is in plant foods, everything here is animal-based protein. This is where you're getting these key nutrients. So all those lovely pictures of pregnant ladies eating salad is not going to support you as an athletic mum through this to be at your optimal best, for baby to be at their best, and for you to be able to recover. So let's talk about protein. Government guidelines are 0.8 to 1.1 grams per kilogram body weight per day, which is just, it's just this from the outset, it's just not enough. So this doesn't account for the changing needs during pregnancy, and it does increase the protein needs increase during pregnancy, or the increased athletic requirements. This calculation is basically based on a load of averages, and it starts off with a normal unpregnant lady requiring 0.6 grams per kilogram per day, gaining on average 13, let's say 14 kilograms throughout the pregnancy in the third trimester, which requires 12.6 extra grams per day. Divide that by an average weight here, 57 kilograms, and this is where you get your 0.22 to add to your 0.66, which gets you your 0.88 as your minimum. They do say that's sort of the lower end, and they have the good grace to go up to 1.1, but as an athlete, you're going to be, and I'll show you I'll make this point later, eating more than that anyway, or I hope you are. So this is based on, and all these sort of government guidelines and most protein intake calculations are based on quite old methods of nitrogen balance studies, which tend to overestimate nitrogen intake and underestimate nitrogen excretion by 30 to 40% almost. So it can be pretty significant. So the IAAO method, and I'm really sorry, I've forgotten what that stands for, apart from I know that the AA is amino acid, is a more accurate method. And Elango and Oval in 2016 used this to look at pregnancy, protein requirements during pregnancy and how they change throughout. And you can see that, yeah, your protein synthesis increases by 15% in the second trimester and up to 25% in the third. So it does go up. So this is something to consider. And their calculations came out at sort of 1.2 in the early pregnancy, up to 1.52 by late pregnancy. So higher than government guidelines, which is good. But if you compare this to, and this is just one study here, Mercer et al., protein requirements in athletes, if you compare what's being recommended here, you've got aerobic endurance athletes being recommended somewhere between 1.3 and 1.63, sorry. Resistance athletes, let's say 1.5, and intermittent exercise at 1.4. So if you're doing this type of training, you already should be over and above what's required in pregnancy. So these are basically what I'm saying is this is too low if you're going to continue training and also continue being pregnant in a healthy way. And what I pulled out of, and actually I don't think this is from this paper, this is from a different paper, which is annoying because I haven't got the reference up there. I'll have to find it. Amino acid kinetics are altered during adolescent pregnancy, maybe not so applicable for right now, but also, and in adult pregnancy with low BMIs, such that the metabolic adaptations are not adequate to sustain a healthy pregnancy outcome. So the key here is with low BMI. So many female athletes do have quite low BMIs. So the altered amino acid kinetics that they will expect to have during pregnancy can really impact the health of the pregnancy and the health of the pregnancy outcome. And we know that low protein intake in pregnancies is always associated with sort of in-uterine growth retardation and low birth weights, and both of those things are very heavily associated with poor outcomes for long-term health with so many different chronic diseases. So you don't want to be having a low birth weight baby or restricting their growth in utero. So protein is really important. So essentially, my advice to the people I've worked with and what I did was aimed for sort of minimum of 1.8 grams per kilogram a day. And it was just easier to work it out as 2 grams per kilogram per day, especially towards the end as well of pregnancy. And I haven't found any literature to say that sort of level would be dangerous in any way. I think obviously if you're dealing with any kind of kidney condition, then that does need considering in a different light. But if you've got healthy working kidneys, that sort of those levels of that level of protein on a daily basis is not going to be a problem. So moving on to vitamin A, which is another one I want to talk about specifically, because I recommend liver and organ meat to all athletes that I work with as sort of nature's multivitamin and as a really nutrient dense food. Then when they become pregnant, and I've had this from a couple of clients, people get very worried about vitamin A intake. It's advised to keep it to sort of, below the WHO advised no more than 10,000 IU daily, and any advice on the NHS really advises against, it warns about pre-formed vitamin A, so retinol and vitamin A, and the NHS actually say that having large amounts of vitamin A can harm your unborn baby. If you're pregnant, do not eat liver or liver products. And this drives me mad, because if you think back to that sort of the slide with all the nutrients on them there, the best sources of them, liver and organ meats and just meat in general, but yeah, liver is on one of them. It's one of the richest sources of a lot of those nutrients. And when you look at traditional societies and more people living more in harmony with their genes and in environments that we used to live in, so more hunter-gatherer societies, more traditional societies, they practice a period of special feeding for couples that want to be, are married and going to become pregnant, or who are pregnant, and they, as the liver being a super prized food stuff, it is given to those couples because of its nutrient density. So the advice to completely avoid it, it doesn't sit well with me when it really is such a nutrient dense food, and you're told instead to eat all the beta carotene containing vegetables, when we know that actually conversion from beta carotene to vitamin A in a high percentage of individuals is really compromised. It's not a particularly efficient process. So when we look at vitamin A, it's essential for functional development and ocular integrity. It has systemic effects on several fetal organs and on the fetal skeletons, really important, and their immune system. My favorite thing about it is that it seems to hold the key to the holy grail puzzle of developmental biology, whereby we are, or should be, nice and symmetrical on the outside, but we're completely asymmetrical on the inside. And it has a really key role in those cell signaling cues that tells a cell what it's going to be, and whether we're symmetrical on the outside or not. And yes, mild vitamin A deficiency sort of telltale symptoms of it are a right eye smaller than the left, and I have this, or a right leg shorter than the left. And I think loads of people have this, and we all think it's quite normal to not be symmetrical because only few people are, and it's one of those things that the most beautiful people in the world are thought to be completely symmetrical, but maybe we're all supposed to be symmetrical and we're not, because we were all slight vitamin A deficient in utero. So we all could have been more beautiful. But vitamin A deficiency also remains the leading cause of blindness around the world, so it is a problem. And the issue with it came from this one paper, Heterogeneity of high vitamin A intake, from 1995, where they concluded that higher than 10,000 IU a day leads to significantly increased risk of birth defects. Now, the main problem with this paper is that papers before it and since have found completely different findings, but there are many other problems with this one paper as well, which is that the confounding factors of that went alongside the vitamin A intake, so other dietary factors, other health factors, they weren't accounted for in the paper. The birth defects observed weren't described or even classified in the papers. We don't really know what they were talking about. It was a synthetic form of vitamin A medication, and they also underestimated the background rate of birth defects when comparing that to the birth defects found in this paper. So it looked like it was way higher in these women having synthetic vitamin A. And like I said, both earlier and later research shows actually a 50% reduction in birth defects between 20 to 50,000 IU a day. So, and like I said, traditional cultures also hold liver as a sacred food for pre-pregnancy and pregnancy nourishment. And vitamin A and D work hand in hand in the body to protect against toxicity from either one alone. So these food sources of vitamin A generally also come with vitamin D as well. So your cod liver oil or your fish and liver, they have vitamin A and vitamin D. So they do work in synergy. So essentially the weight of the rest of the evidence, sort of clinical, other actual research papers and epidemiological from other societies, is that this is not really something we should be basing a recommendation on, and yet we are, and potentially cutting out a whole food that is a really nutrient dense food for pregnancy, especially for athletes. So just in case you didn't know, this is sort of nutrition in the beef liver per 100 grams. So you don't need to eat this sort of once or twice a week, and you'll be getting incredible amounts of some of the key nutrients that we talked about. So cholesterol, protein, your B vitamins, iron, and then zinc, copper, selenium, thiamine, more B vitamins, and choline. So it as a food for an athlete, I love it, and there's no problem with it unless people don't like it. But as a food for a pregnant woman, it's really important too. So for a pregnant athlete, it's key, and it should be included. And hopefully, yeah, we can put people's minds at rest about those intakes. And look at 100 gram serving is coming in for the vitamin A at 17,000 IU. So it's still under some of the studies that have gone up to 50,000 IU a day and found no problem with that. So quickly run over that there is evidence of depletion in athletes. It is an area of concern. This is just a few studies that show, obviously all in women, sorry, that was a stupid thing to say, all in women athletes, that basically show that, yeah, there's a high prevalence of nutrient depletion or decreased intake under recommended intakes, and actual nutrient depletion for some of these key ones. So folate, iron, calcium, vitamin A, the B vitamins. Down here we've got iron again, so and vitamin C. So yeah, it is an area of concern. We know that in female athletes tend to eat lower calories than they should, especially in the sort of sports where there's a aesthetic element to it. We know there's a higher prevalence of eating disorders or disordered eating among female athletes. And there's also a higher prevalence of vegans and vegetarians, and, you know, those images of the pregnant women all eating salads. It's that messaging that, you know, many me and maybe women should just be having salads, and that's really what we need. And it's not the case. So it does need to be focused upon. So moving on to breastfeeding. Am I doing time here? It's hopefully okay. I'm not going to go into individual nutrients again. That sort of the same principles apply basically. You're making a meal for baby multiple times a day. So you need to make sure that you're taking in a really nutrient dense diet. And there's lots of evidence that mums are deficient in key nutrients, so magnesium, B6, folate, calcium, zinc, but also that deficiency gets passed on to the milk. So that this sort of myth that no matter what you're eating, your body will make the right milk for your baby is not wholly true. If you are deficient, then your milk can be deficient too, and there's evidence for that in ADK and vitamin C and the B vitamins and folates too. So it's really important that, you know, you continue eating a nutrient dense diet into breastfeeding. But moving on I'll just quickly move on to fats. The type quality matters, and this may seem like an obvious point, but quality really matters in the foods that you're eating because it does reflect in your breast milk, and fat is one of the key ones. So babies need loads of arachidonic acid and DHA in breastfeeding, and they get that solely from diet. As you know, that's essential. Those are essential polyunsaturated fatty acids. We can't synthesize them. They have to come from the diet. If your diet is high in trans fats and processed fat, it actually lowers those other fats in the breast milk, and those trans fats go into breast milk. this is a nice point. Cholesterol is so important to baby that breast milk contains a special enzyme that ensures 100% absorption for it for babies. So again, cholesterol, do not avoid it. And then saturated fat in mum's diet also stimulates baby's immune system and works to keep DHA and AA in the tissues where it's needed. So the quality of fats really matters. You want to be including those natural fats that come in dairy and in meats, and then some fruit-based fats, your coconut and avocado and olive oil, and really avoiding the fats that are very high in sort of linoleic acid or pro-inflammatory markers, or trans fat. They shouldn't be in there at all, really. And then between babies, the fats in the milk do decrease if you don't take time to consume a really sort of nutrient-dense fat diet between pregnancies. And again, that could be very important with athletes who might be looking to try to get back into shape quickly, maybe avoiding fats, going on a low-fat diet, or sort of, and then getting pregnant again. It's going to be compounded if that's the situation, the sort of quality of their breast milk. And then hormones. This is a big one for sort of recovery and getting back into training whilst breastfeeding. It really does take some considering of what's going on in your body, because breastfeeding basically mimics menopause. So having had these really high levels of progesterone and estrogen during pregnancy, prolactin, once you give birth and your breastfeeding, goes up, and these just tank. You're not producing high levels of them at all during breastfeeding. And they have really key physiological effects that are, key to training. So we talked about progesterone earlier being anti-inflammatory, and it also has these anti-nociception activity, which I don't think I've said right, but it's basically has a key role in sort of, oh God, what am I trying to say? Physical trauma to tendon tissues, and I think it goes hand in hand with its anti-inflammatory role in basically being able to support and mend those kind of stress and oh God, my words aren't quite coming out. The sort of mechanical damage that gets done in training is what I'm trying to say. Mechanical, that's what I couldn't think of. Estrogen. Without estrogen, it's going to impact your I've got a spelling mistake, your calcium incorporation into bones, but also reduce collagen incorporation into tendons, and also impact tendon stiffness. So estrogen is a really interesting one when it comes to tendons. So low estrogen actually increases tendon stiffness, which is a good thing for performance. So in terms of plyometric ability and sprinting and running, you want stiffer tendons for performance. But so that's when you've got low estrogen, that's that helps it. But then when you've got high estrogen, it increases collagen incorporation into the tendon. So those fluctuations that you get during normal menstrual cycles, where sometimes it's low and sometimes it's high, work as a whole to increase tendon like structure and tendon like functionality as a whole. There's times where it's going to be laxer but incorporating more collagen, and then times where it's going to be stiffer and better performance. But with it just being low, you're not getting those fluctuations, so your tendon's just going to be stiffer and incorporating less collagen, which I think, in my experience, it could lead to more muscle tears because your muscle's doing more movement than the tendon, but also it could just lead to more tendinopathies because your tendon is stiff and you're still putting load through it if you're coming back into training. So it's really worth considering. And I've seen this with so many of my sort of athletic friends who have been pregnant and got back to training while breastfeeding, constant tendinopathies. And it was the same for me after my first son. Then after my second son, I did something different and it's really helped. So I'll talk about that. But you've also got decreased insulin sensitivity without estrogen. And that's going to impact your body composition, but also your muscle mass. So your adaptation to training without that estrogen stimulus, you're going to struggle to be maybe putting on muscle and adapting in the way that you were before. And it's going to impact, the sort of your body composition as you recover from pregnancy as well. And then over here, prolactin blocks dopamine, so that is going to potentially, and so that's why it has it blocks dopamine, so that could impact motivation, your mood, your sleep, And that also plays a role in sort of postnatal depression as well. So these things are all could have impacts on performance through these mechanisms. And it's not to say that, yeah, when you're breastfeeding, you don't get back into training and you don't, work your way up, but you've just got to consider that this is what's going on. You're essentially in menopause, and you have to respect that. So in terms of food, there's probably things that you can do. Protein and natural fats, I've talked about it loads, but that's going to help balance energy and blood sugar levels, especially in a situation where you're less insulin sensitive than you were before. But when it comes to carbohydrates, just eat them around training. So we know that training will increase insulin sensitivity and also increases GLUT4 receptors, so that insulin independent mechanism of absorbing glucose. So get your carbohydrates in around training when you can use them the best, and then the rest of the time, make sure you're focusing on getting some good protein and natural fats in throughout the day. Include animal-based foods to cover all the key nutrients. Eggs, yolks, and offal, include them liberally, especially in the in your breastfeeding stage. Include bone broth and collagen. So this is the key one for me, and for what I've seen to help is, whilst your collagen incorporation is so low during breastfeeding, and there's this danger of this connective tissue injuries if you're getting back into training, I found it has been really helpful to supplement with collagen every day. So I'll have a collagen powder every day, and I've recommended it to my clients, and they've noticed a real difference with including that on a daily basis. And bone broth similarly supports that. So, although the collagen integration, like the stimulus for it is reduced, perhaps just increasing the amount of collagen it seems to help. And then looking to menopausal literature in this area, seeing as you're mimicking menopause, and perhaps looking at the literature is what we should be sort of looking at how to best support active women whilst they're breastfeeding. And I haven't been able to find any yet, but I'm sort of spitballing here, but I'm wondering about phytoestrogens for collagen incorporation. We know that phytoestrogens, if you're convinced by the research, and I'm sitting on the fence a bit because I'm not convinced by all of it, but there is a large body of research that supports the use of isoflavones in perimenopause and menopause, because they're estrogen, they stimulate estrogen, they can sit on estrogen receptors and mimic some of those impacts. And in this area, I found an interview with Dr. Keith Barr talking about this not in menopause, but in collegiate athletes, and how he sees more tendon injuries in his female athletes. And so they supplemented with genistein, and there's a study on it. I just can't find the study anywhere. So I've got this interview with him and he talks about it, but I can't find the study. So I'm still searching for it. But I feel like that's the place to start looking to see what we could do to support breastfeeding athletes as they come back into training. And I think that's it. The end.
Thanks, Henrietta. That was brilliant. Can you unshare for a minute, and we'll transition. So, because this is a free webinar, guys, you get one ad break. And I'm just going to quickly share this screen. This is what we've called a portfolio image that we put together. And we have our integrative body systems module starting next week. We're almost finished our short course. And the integrated body systems was considered module 1 of our certificate course. So basically at the bottom of this, it says, if you do both base units and then 2 of the specialty units, it's still the certificate of integrative sports nutrition. But what we've done, based on I think a lot of people's needs nowadays to kind of go in there for a short period of time, not spend too much money, and sort of pick and choose learning, we've broken up all these modules. So you can pick and choose, and we're gradually going to extend these specialty units like I've mentioned to Henrietta, that I really want to do a female health one, health for the athlete one. So we can extend it out into that as well. These are the ones that I'm committing to this year, though. So if any of you are interested in dipping your toe in, this is one of the bigger modules, but it's still, you can just do one module, and that starts next week. So yeah, just drop me an email or pop something in the chat box. I'll leave my email address in there later on. Okay, so we're going to get over to questions, and we had quite a lot of discussion going on, so that was brilliant. Thank you, guys. So I'm going to start with Scott. He said he's interested in Henrietta's comment on the athletic mum to be preparing in advance and getting all their nutrients in the right space well before they're pregnant, and be good to get her comment around the challenges of low energy availability stroke red S and what seems like a disconnect. The low energy availability is certainly an issue in triathlon. Okay, so do you want to sort of delve into that for a minute or two, Henrietta?
Well, yeah, as I said, we see that, yeah, a lot of female athletes under eating as a general rule. So it is of concern if they're going into pregnancy, if they're going straight in from athletic career where they and going straight in to get pregnant. The Reds situation, I think, if it's a very complicated picture, but essentially, if there's that, I'm not quite sure what the question is, but if they're that far down the line where, you know, menstruations like cycles aren't regular, then the first thing that needs to happen before they can get pregnant is that they do become regular. But it's an absolute sign, if you're not menstruating regularly, that your body doesn't want to get pregnant. I mean, it's kind of that simple. And if it doesn't want to get pregnant, the reason is it's not in a state where it can support a healthy pregnancy. I'm so sorry, I've just had a tough thing. You've got to go downstairs, sweetheart. I'm sorry, in the middle of something. So sorry. So yeah, it's a concern. I don't know. The thing that annoys me about that situation is I just don't think it's necessary for any female athlete to be undernourished in that way. I don't see how it supports performance, and I mean, you can be light and strong if that's the concern with other dietary and sort of dietary manipulations without it being a situation where you're under eating in calories. But I think the education is not out there. The chat amongst the pressure, maybe the peer pressure from how other people look, and not having the knowledge to sort it out yourself, maybe of, you know, a point here. But certainly when I have had periods in my past where I probably have been too low weight, and my menstrual cycles weren't always regular, and I had real concerns because I also left having kids get quite late, that it was going to be an issue for me, which is why I was so deliberate about spending 6 months getting everything like lined up and being just making a concerted effort to be in a different place to where I was when I was training. So I don't know if that answers your question really at all, or answers it.
So yeah, just type in the box, Scott. I'll move on to the next.
Gave me a thumbs up.
Oh, cool. Right, Danielle. So you were talking about something at the time when she posted this. This is exactly the question I have for postpartum female athletes: protein requirements and other nutrients to add for exercise recovery. Danielle, Henrietta talked quite a lot about postpartum, so just let me know if she answered that for you. I'm going to move on to Jenny, which is a stonker of a question when you're talking about liver and eggs and so on, Henrietta. What would be the best approach when looking at supporting plant predominant stroke vegan pregnant athletes to ensure a healthy pregnancy and outcome for mum and baby?
It would be high amounts of supplementation. I don't think it's in an athletic mum, it would be very hard to get all of it from the diet anyway. So I'll be supplementing an omnivorous mum anyway. So a vegan or vegetarian mum, it would be I'd be looking at whole food sort of sources of all these vegan nutrients. And it would have to be at fairly high levels as well, because they're not going to be as bioavailable as the nutrients from meat, with all those the plant-based vitamins, sort of your vitamin A precursors or your vitamin K1s, etc. They all need an extra sort of enzymatic process or two to turn them into something that we can use. And then it's the amount that you're even supplementing probably isn't the amount that you're absorbing. My real advice is have a serious talk to them about why they're doing what they're doing, because my heartfelt opinion on this subject is that it's not good for mum and baby. There are no traditional societies around the world that would shun meat, especially at this stage of life. So I would have to have a very frank conversation with them about why they're doing what they're doing. And then from that, if it was still a hard no to all sources of animal protein, then it would be supplementation. Perhaps they might consider supplementing. You can buy some good quality desiccated organ supplements. So maybe if they couldn't bring themselves to eat it, if they were okay with supplementing, then you can get good desiccated liver, kidney, heart supplements from a couple of UK based companies, and I would be pushing those. I know, as a nutritional therapist, I have to respect other people's view of the world, and I absolutely do, but they have to make these decisions based on the right information, and I'm not sure that a lot of people who choose to be vegan or vegetarian are basing their decisions on the truth, but more on people that are shouting the loudest and sort of propaganda messages that are out there. So I don't know if that helps.
I'll throw in an add-on question to that. Just your experience. Would you say some people can pull off a fully vegan plant-based diet better than others, from what you've seen?
In pregnancy or in
just in general? Pregnancy, I think, yeah, I will stand behind you with your thoughts there. But in general,
yeah, I think certainly there are some people. We are all different biochemically, and certainly some people can do it better than others. There is definitely a continuum of people that will thrive more on that sort of slightly higher carbohydrate intake you're naturally going to get with a vegan diet and lower protein. But I haven't met anyone who can do it supplement free, because there just are some nutrients you cannot get on a vegan diet. So I haven't met anyone who doesn't need a couple of supplements, but there's certainly people that seem to manage better than others.
Yeah, good response. In my experience, it's the peaceful people who can pull it off. Such as
that's probably about right, yeah.
South African yoga friends who live the yogic lifestyle. Yeah, some of them do really well. But in the fast-paced, westernized lifestyle, it's much more of a challenge. Okay, so Kate says, is there any exercise stress that needs to be avoided in pregnancy? So that's a big topic, so don't go too far down the rabbit hole. Just throw out a few thoughts there.
The answer is yes, there is. But my experience is it's on a very individual basis, and it probably is based more on what you were doing before you got pregnant and your experience of training exercise before and how you went into it. So I know that there are sort of prohibited exercises, and a lot of them are in that first trimester, I think, because it's that's probably where it's you're most volatile and there's most potential to lose a fetus. But again, I do really think it depends on what you were doing before you went in. I know that lots of stuff that I did during pregnancy was probably contraindicated, but it was just a maintenance of what I was already doing. So I wasn't stressing myself outside of stuff that I could already do beforehand. But then as there are definitely, as things, as you go progressing on, you don't want to be doing lots of stuff lying on your back for a long period of time because of the pressure on a couple of key veins and key blood supplies to baby. You want to be protecting pelvic floor as the weight of everything gets more in it, so you don't want to be doing lots of stuff where you're sort of stretching. So lots and lots of running late into pregnancy might not be good for everyone, but then I know there's endurance runners that have done it late into pregnancy. What you don't know is how they've recovered after. So again, modeling, there is a level of modeling for people, on people that might be similar to you, but also unless you've had the conversation with them afterwards, like, how's your pelvic floor now, then you don't know whether, they ran until they were 9 months and they look great, and they might look great, but then they might not be having any pelvic floor control, and they're not going to tell you that. So, it's a really hard question to answer. I think it's a lot of it is quite intuitive if you're an athlete, but do some research on why things are recommended and why they're not, and then you have to try and triangulate that with your own experience, I think. Sorry, it wasn't.
You used one word there that was really key, and intuitive, because so many athletes train based on the training program that they've set themselves or by their coach. If we can get more mind-body connection, then you can feel it. Well,
Agreed.
I'm not talking for a woman going through pregnancy, but in general, we can feel if we're overwhelming our system. Okay, so Jenny asks, do you feel the hormonal changes during breastfeeding influence whether and how long athletic mums breastfeed for?
Yes. 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 Because I think they probably, if they're trying to get back to I think sort of peak performance in international competition again, I think there's a period of time where you can do both pretty successfully if you really look after yourself and ensure a good nutrient intake. But I think there comes a point probably where you need to make the decision between continuing to breastfeed or really pushing back on and getting back to that that real peak level again. So I think I do think I really do think there is a choice to be made. I don't think you could do 2-4 years breastfeeding and performing at let's say elite or international level. I think you could breastfeed for a good 9 months and then recover from that pretty quickly to get back to international level maybe within a year, or even it just depends on the window they've allowed themselves. I think they do. Some people give up's not quite the right word, don't have the right support or encouragement to keep going both at the same time, because I think you can do it. But I understand that the first time I went through it, I probably wasn't doing exactly that. I didn't really look into exactly the research and what was going on, and I did end up with a fair few tendinopathies and muscle tears, which I've completely avoided the second time round, and I've had that experience with some of my clients too. So I think with support there is definitely a decent amount of time that you could spend nourishing your baby and being able to sort of make your way back into training. But you've just got to, I suppose women have to accept that either you accept that you're going to take a year and a half or even 2 years out, or if you only want it to be a year, then perhaps breastfeeding is going to be a 9-month thing as opposed to a year thing or an 18-month thing. But the other thing is that, and this is a bit of a sidebar, the acceptance of having your baby in and around at training where you could stop and breastfeed them if you needed to, needs to be looked at and more inclusive, so women can feel like I can go to wherever your training situation is. take baby with me, they can sleep while I do X, Y, and Z, I can breastfeed them there, and it's all accepted and it's fine. And that's actually not the case in lots of places. So I think that is a big influence too.
Thanks, Henrietta. It sort of occurred to me there that a really nice support for a pregnant woman coming back after pregnancy would be a nutrition specialist such as yourself, who understands the process well, combined with a physio stroke S&C coach who understands the process. So ideally female who have been through it and can really, really make a big difference to the recovery.
And I think the prevalence of pelvic floor, sorry, I lost train of thought then, pelvic floor problems is really high in women coming back from pregnancy, and it's not talked about. But imagine having to try and get back into training with those issues without sort of, you're sent out of the hospital, I think, with, look, you know, do these 3 times a day for the rest of your life, and it's just these sort of 2 exercises, but it's not enough, or it's not targeted enough, or people, you know, women have different issues with pelvic floor. Sometimes it's a fatigue thing, as in it just, or sometimes it's an absolute strength situation. So depending on your sport, there's probably some really specific help that you might need, and there's really good pelvic floor physios out there that in combination with a really good nutrition program could really support women back sooner and just in better shape than before. So you're right.
And the pelvic floor issues, if not dealt with early on, women carry that for years, and they'll always carry it if they don't actually go back to the base.
Absolutely.
Okay, 2 other questions. Scott says he'd be interested in how athletes would assess the need of taking supplements, given that some would be in testing pools. Obviously, third-party risk minimized, batch testing products cost more. So yeah, do you want to just comment on supplement quality and sourcing?
And it's always, when you work in the more integrated nutrition space, this is always a bit of a something I come up against, because a lot of the supplements I want to recommend to athletes, because for reasons that aren't related to performance but to health, are not batch tested because they're not sports supplements. So I do come up against it a lot. It's what I suppose, if they're sort of in a space where they're looking to become pregnant and getting into a nourished state for that, or during pregnancy, I don't know where. So I suppose if you're still on a testing register, you're just as likely to get tested. It's not until you retire that they take you off the register. Sorry, that was me just thinking out loud. So
you'd have to assess all that, wouldn't you?
Exactly.
You'd have to talk to your governing body, and are you still registered or unregistered?
Yes, exactly. You'd have to sort of know that about them. But unless they're retired, if they're an elite athlete, they will still be registered. So you know, unless you retire and come back, then that's one way to get around it. The other thing is, it's just checking the provenance of where you're getting them from. I mean, it's unlikely that high quality whole food supplements are going to be contaminated with something that is illegal in sport, because they're not being produced in the same factories where those products might be. But again, that's not a guarantee, and that's not going to stop me getting a ban if it did happen. The one thing that doesn't really help, but kind of does, there's a range of desiccated organ supplements, so basically which you can use as a multi-nutrient, so let's say pregnancy multi-nutrient, in America, called Heart and Soil, and they've all been batch tested so athletes can use them. But I'm struggling to get them over here, which is really annoying because they're amazing. And I have written to a couple of the supplement companies here to say, can we try and get them batch tested? But I'm not getting anywhere. So I don't think I've really answered your question. It's a tricky one, and I wrestle with it all the time, because I don't really recommend a lot of sports supplements to my athletes, because I'm mostly dealing on things on a more of a health-based level, which means I come up against it quite a lot. And Yeah.
Yeah, we're all in the same boat where we have one foot in health, one foot in performance, and you've got somebody who could potentially one day maybe be tested, and then you need to be super careful. But you know, I'm dealing with a young, adrenally exhausted cyclist at the moment, and yeah, I need to use some adaptogens with him because he just wasn't making progress with simple things. But he's young enough, thankfully, he's not really at that testing level. So you have to kind of...
If you can get an athlete to stomach some kind of organ meats, and really good ways of incorporating it, by the way, is just blending it into fortified mince. This is how my kids eat it all the time. They've got no idea. So blend heart has a lovely texture. Heart's a muscle, so heart's quite easy to do, and if you slow cook it, it's delicious. So heart stews are a win, no one knows. But yeah, liver and kidneys, some butchers will do it for you into a mince, but I literally just blend it in my NutriBullet and then mix it through mince, and I make burgers and like curries, and especially curries, and like bobotti is a great one because we put spices with it and some raisins in. They have no idea, they just like the raisins. So, but anyway, the point was, if you can get athletes to maybe incorporate those, you know, on a really regular basis, perhaps you don't need the supplements. I mean, you could do a test and a retest. I mean, they're that rich in that you know, that might be enough. You could do it through whole food sources, but they've just got to be willing to eat the food.
It's a very good tip, so thank you. Yeah, I mean, when we're in that situation, we need to look for those whole food forms as much as possible. So I hope you clean your NutriBullet very thoroughly before you make smoothies.
Before I do the smoothies. Liver smoothie. I mean, that's, yeah, maybe I should make a recipe for that.
Okay, last question. So Danielle, be interested in how athletes, oh no, I've already read that one. No, I've copied over Scott's question for Danielle. What did Danielle say? Let me just look back. If I can find her, there's so many things. Okay. When eating higher protein in postpartum, not nursing athletes, which nutrients do we need to consider so as not to acidify the blood? Potassium, question mark, what else, question mark.
So is that in breastfeeding or non-breastfeeding athletes? Or?
So postpartum, not nursing athletes, okay. So non-breastfeeding.
I'm not convinced that I suppose what you'd call high protein or higher protein does directly lead to acidifying the blood. So I suppose I'm sort of dodging the question there, but I mean, I would always consider the you know, getting sources of your electrolytes. Sorry, my brain just left there. But yeah, so your potassium and magnesium and your other key minerals well, coconut water is a great source of them. Avocados are a good source of them. So you've got, you know, a range, and probably, you know, like I said, magnesium, of those nutrients I sort of talked about, is probably the one that's better got from plant sources than animal sources. But the act of breastfeeding is one of the key triggers for your body to start reversing all the changes that it made during pregnancy. So it's a key trigger for the microbiome to change back again, which is why breastfeeding really supports women getting back to their normal weight and staying, you know, going back to their normal weight. So if they're not nursing, then you do have some physiological changes to contend with that might take longer to change back, because they're not getting that key trigger that we're done with pregnancy now, and all those metabolic hormonal changes can go back. So there's probably the question is probably more to do with macronutrient balance around that, and trying to support the microbiome back to its previous state, which I don't know. I haven't actually looked into research on how that happens in women that don't breastfeed, what the triggers are, whether the timelines are different. But knowing that breastfeeding is that key trigger, then when you're not doing it, it could impact those processes for sure.
Yeah, it's another area to research.
Yeah, it's another big
Kind of a
question.
thing you look at when you have a client in that situation.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, absolutely. But I mean, I do have clients who have sort of said, you know, my gut's never been the same since pregnancy, and that have breastfed and haven't breastfed. So for whatever reason, it hasn't quite ever, you know, they don't deal with some carbohydrates in the same way. They get bloated eating certain foods. And so I do think there is some changes that maybe don't make their way back, or some things that stick, whether that's to do with breastfeeding or environmental triggers or stress or what. I do think there's some changes that last. So in those instances, then either testing or the use of looking at taking out trigger foods, digestive enzymes, or probiotics has helped. So there is that.
Thanks, Henrietta. We've run well over, so we'll round it off there. Sally was asking, should love to read more on the microbiome and breastfeeding relationship. Do you have studies or any links you could send me, and I can then share tomorrow when I share slides and stuff? I did have
a slide on it, but I just didn't have time, so I took it out.
Yeah, okay.
So I've got it, and I'll send it over to you.
Let's stick it back in then.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Henrietta. Hopefully we can do more of this and some bigger education stuff on this, because yeah, it's a big topic.
Yeah, and these questions have been great. Now I'm I'm thinking of more stuff that needs to be looked at too. So
thanks for everyone who's hung on for such a long time, and for great questions and interactions. And we'll see you again next month, hopefully. So bye for now.
Thanks, everyone.